Oliver. Oliver's an adoptee who was searching for his birth family for over 30 years. He currently lives in Dayton, Ohio, but was born and adopted in Los Angeles, California. So his birth records still remain closed. In 2018, he matched with his mother and half-brother through Ancestry DNA. Over the past 2 years, he has established communication with his birth father and half-brother, as well as connecting with a community of adoption constellation members who have helped him along his journey. Welcome, Oliver and Becky, to our happy hour this evening. Yes.
All right, so are we unmuted?
You are.
You're unmuted.
Oh, okay. So anyhow, a really cool thing that I think in this room, from the time that Adoption Network Cleveland started a support group in Dayton, Ohio, Lynn and I were co-facilitators for that group. For a variety of reasons, we both stepped away from that a while back, and we're just getting ready to, actually, we had our first meeting scheduled in April, and coronavirus happened, so those meetings did not get started. But Oliver and I are going to be co-facilitating once we're finally able to get those meetings going again. So I thought it would be really cool. Oliver and I have talked quite a bit about our experiences with reunion, and we thought it would be something that would be really helpful for this community. To just spend some time talking about reunion and what it's like, because I think what we have all come to realize is that everything that's going on, that's been going on for the last 6 weeks or so, is completely unprecedented. Everybody's life has changed. I don't think I've talked to a single person that says I'm carrying on with my life the way I was, in February. And so, that raises the question, does this change how I feel about reunion? Does this change how the people I may be in reunion with feel about this? And I think that the pace of this has all gone so quickly that we just thought that it would be really good to spend a little bit of time just talking about reunion. And I think we're coming at this too from the idea that we're not professionals with this. We're living our experience. We're here to talk about our experience, and Oliver and I will both share our experiences. And then Lynn has also agreed to chat a little bit about her new discoveries and a little bit about how she's feeling about that when we open up discussion time. So what we want to do is set some framework and then spend plenty of time, hopefully have plenty of time to do some discussion after we're done. So with that, do you have anything you want to add, Oliver?
No, I'd say we go into your slides and then we'll carry on from there.
Okay. All right. I think we can go ahead, move a couple slides forward, David, to the one that's, can I move this now? Can I do this? No. Sorry. I'm not, you're muted, David. Okay, so, all right, so if we could go ahead to the next one that says let's explore reunion there. So really the framework of how we're going to proceed with this a little bit tonight is just to talk a little bit about some of the considerations, that we may want to look at when we're thinking about whether or not or how we go about reunion during this time. We're going to talk a little bit about, starting with ourselves. We're going to talk about some of the different stages of reunion. Every stage is, every situation is unique. Everybody is handling everything that's going on differently. We're handling how we feel about reunion differently, and and there's different stages. So it's not like there's a checklist that you can go off and say this is how this is the best way to handle this. But probably the three big buckets that Oliver and I talked about are some of us have extra time on our hands, or we've been searching for a long time, and all of a sudden during this time of craziness in our world, we make a discovery. And so then what do we do with that? We may have already made those discoveries and may have started maybe towards some steps, taken some steps towards contact. And now we wonder, where are we, what do we do with this now? Do we go ahead? Do we just let this sit for now? You know, how do we handle it? And then for others of us, we've been in reunion for a while, and we just wonder, you know, does this change anything? Do we, you know, should we back off a little bit? Should we continue? How, you know, how do we go ahead? Somebody say something? Okay, sorry. And so, you know, what we're going to do with this piece of it is at this point, Oliver and I will both share our experiences from kind of dipping our toes in the water reunion during this time, and how we're handling ongoing. And then, as I mentioned, when we open up discussion, Lynn's going to talk a little bit about her situation and her new discoveries in her long search for her birth father as we go on. And then we want to leave plenty of time open for discussion, so that we can, you know, just kind of have this group time to discuss how we're feeling about reunion in this day and time. Oliver, do you have anything?
Nope.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay, so let's head on to the next slide. So some of the considerations that we had talked about, and this is something I read somewhere, it's like, you know, life has screeched to a halt, but just because we're kind of in this, I've heard people refer to this time as like the great pause. It doesn't mean we're getting any extra days added onto our lives. So, you know, that shouldn't be the only factor that we take into consideration, but for me, that seems to be really huge. And I've been thinking about that a lot, not just with adoption reunion, but with other areas of my life. You know, I'm not going to just stop living just because we have to stay at home and stay away from many of the activities that are important to us right now. You know, the other thing you've got to look at is I don't care where you're at in the process, whether you have just made a discovery or whether you've been in reunion for many, many years. I don't think I've talked to anyone who's in reunion who says it's all just completely normal. It's emotional, it's life-changing, it's a major piece of our lives, and it deserves really a lot of consideration to figure out how we want to handle it. Also, this is really a time of reflection for a lot of us, and we think about maybe what's important. And I think Oliver's going to talk about this quite a bit later, or quite a bit here in a few minutes, about you know, when you are reflecting about reunion and our relationships with those people that we haven't known all of our lives. Have we had time to think about that and how maybe that may change for us right now? So, you know, I guess really what it boils down to is it's really natural to have questions about how we should handle reunion during these times. And hopefully tonight we can really have a good discussion together about, you know, maybe some of the things we want to think about when we're moving forward.
And I think this is also a good time, you know, for with the fact that we have to slow down our pace on how we relate to people, and I think this allows us a chance to, as you say, reflect and to think about how we would handle things before actually moving on in a pattern that might be a little bit too fast for others. So I think this is a great time for us to reflect and to really try to understand the best way to move forward when we're in reunion. So.
Okay. I think we're ready to move. Yeah, there we go. One of the things I think about with this is we really have to start with ourselves. I mean, how are we handling this? Do we feel stressed? Are we kind of relieved to have a little extra time on our hands, maybe working from home? Is it, bringing our stress level down? Are we, worried about when our unemployment check is going to come? Or, there's so many things, and only you know that. Only you know what life is like for you right now. And it really, like Oliver said, it's, time to slow down and really, really think about whether or not is this something that we really think we can add to our plate right now, or keep on our plate? Or is it time that maybe we want to step back a little bit from a relationship we've been in for a while, just because there's so much else going on? But then, the opposite can be true with that too. Sometimes birth family lives close by, sometimes they don't. What if they live across the country and for example, you have, a birth parent who maybe isn't in great health? Are you going to be worried about them all the time if you're not checking in with them? Are you going to be worried that, they're maybe not taking the right precautions, or that, they might be getting ill? Is it going to add to your stress level if you put a search or reunion on hold? That what it boils down to is it really maybe takes some time to journal and reflect and think about where you're at with all of this, and whether the emotional work that it takes to be healthy in reunion is what you want to be working on right now. And then again, there's always two sides to every coin, right? And the birth family member that you're reaching out to may be in a different place than you. They may be craving that connection with you when you feel like you need a little bit of space, or, perhaps they are, in a situation where they don't know when their unemployment check's coming in, and, or maybe they know someone who's ill, or, there's just so many scenarios. It's also individual. And I think what that boils down with there is when you're already in contact with somebody, good communication, really keeping that communication flow going so that there aren't misunderstandings happening at this time. And I think we're ready to go on to the next one, David. We talked about the 3 buckets, and one of those is searching and new discoveries. And I think probably everybody in this room, if they haven't figured out a birth family member by DNA, they know somebody who has. And if you've got a little bit extra time on your hands, you might have really delved into your DNA results, and you might have made a discovery. You might have figured out who a birth family member is during this time. And so, I think the question that would come up here is this the right time to reach out? And Oliver, you want to talk a little bit more about this? You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I think this is a good time. We're on our computers a little bit more. I'm curious. I just had the thought in my head. I saw that Tracy Anders is on. I'm just wondering how busy she is now with people getting more results and actually doing a little bit more sleuthing. Tracy, if you are willing to talk.
I'm willing to talk. It's kind of an odd time, right? Because yes, we have more time, we can delve into research, but also agencies are closed for the most part. They're slow in getting us non-identifying information, or some states aren't providing original birth certificates, so that it's difficult as well.
Right.
So yeah, it's hard. And Becky, I think what you said is so on point. Like, you just don't know what's going on in the other side's life. So you have all the added things to think about reaching out. So yeah, there's just a lot more. It's so complex right now. But.
It is. Thanks, Tracy. So I think, it's an interesting time in which, you can, for me, it's catching up on all my reading concerning reunions and the issues that we as adoptees face. I remember last year's conference, I was just overwhelmed with so much information, and I just have all these web pages that I wanted to get back to. So this has been a good time for me to look at the resources out there to help me with my reunion and how to approach reunion too. So.
And Oliver, you have you've been going to virtual meetings, correct? Like the support group meetings.
I have, yes.
And how has that, where we're doing everything virtually now, how has that been as an experience for you?
That's
I know
been
we've
really
talked
great.
about how we're ready for in-person, but
right, and right at the crux of shutting everything down, we were all scheduled. Well, a lot of us were scheduled to be going to the Indiana conference and to the Cleveland conference, and I had been meeting because we didn't have a Dayton group at the time. I was meeting with the Adoption Network Cleveland virtually, so we were already in the pattern of meeting virtually. So, and we were all talking about meeting each other at the conference, getting to see each other face to face. And then it didn't happen. And there was a lot of disappointment, but surprisingly, all the meetings started going to Zoom, and I still could see people. I could see people face to face online and actually talk with them and relate to them. And the frequency of these meetings has gone up a little bit, and I've been able to meet other people. The Cleveland meeting and the Columbus meeting, they're a little bit far away, so I never got a chance to sit with that crowd, but now I have, and I've actually getting to know a lot more adoptees online through Zoom. So it's been a really great time to be able to connect. I think last week, Rich, we got the guys together, and we were able to talk through some issues. So, yeah, it's kind of disappointing that we didn't get to see each other physically at the conferences, but these meetings have really, I wouldn't say satiated, but it's scratched an itch that's been out there that I was hoping to scratch at the conferences, but it's been nice being able to connect with people online through this medium. It's the next best thing, I would say.
Okay. And I think we're ready to hit the next slide. So the next bucket, and as I mentioned, Lynn's going to talk, when we open discussion, Lynn's going to talk about her experience with making a big discovery when we're right in the middle of this pandemic. And the next bucket that we mentioned at the beginning was initiating reunion during this time. And Oliver has had some experience with this and has been spending a lot of time thinking about it. So all yours, Oliver.
Thanks. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I am an adoptee. I live here in Dayton, Ohio. I was born and adopted in Los Angeles, California. I consider myself a late-term discovery adoptee. I grew up most of my life looking a lot like my parents. They were Dutch-Indonesian immigrants. And it wasn't until my 17th birthday that they sat me down and told me that I was adopted. Since then, I don't think I'm still processing it. So, 30-something odd years later, and I'm still processing. So through the years, I've gone through experience of trying to search and going through the databases. And once the internet came out, that was a wonderful tool, but still not being able to find anything. And then, as was stated, in 2018, 2 years ago, DNA results came back. And I suddenly had my birth mother's name. I knew that she was a single mother when I was born, so I had no aspirations of possibly finding my birth father. So I was very excited to get my birth mother's name. And that was early in the summer of 2018. And I suddenly had a name and I didn't know what to do with it. And so the engineer that I am, I went through the library and checked out all the books about adoptions. And as an engineer, I wanted to find out the formula of what exactly I needed to do to have the perfect reunion and not mess it up, because I had a friend who was in reunion with her birth family, and things haven't gone great. But as an engineer, I needed to know the formula. And reading from book to book to book, and it frustrated me because everybody's story was unique and different, and there is no formula. And I met Becky at Adoption Network Cleveland meeting down here in Dayton. That was the first time I met her, and got to get that off my chest, and we talked through things, and it was great to be able to get into a community that could give me tools and help me think through the process. In 2019, I went to the conference, met with many more great people, and again, more tools to try to create a reunion. While at the conference, someone said, so are you matched with anybody else in your family? And I said, I think I've matched with some cousins. It says that it's close family in there. And they said, pull it up real quick. And they pulled it. So I pulled up my Ancestry DNA results, and they looked at the CM number and they said, I think that's a half brother right there. Yeah, you've got some pretty high numbers. And I said, wait, that's a half brother? And at that point, that just blew my mind. Suddenly I have a connection to my birth father, because I had done sleuthing on my birth mother and found out some information, and this half brother clearly is not from her side. So that was a very exciting time. And soon after that, I did some more sleuthing and did some more research. And I was able to find my birth father, which was a revelation. And late summer last year, I actually started reaching out to him through email and through Facebook. Facebook Messenger is the main way that we've communicated. Very reserved man, but his passions are similar to mine, which is quite curious. I laughed because he goes country western dancing ever so often. Back in college, that's what I did when I was in Atlanta. Every Monday night I was at Miss Kitty's. So as a Asian kid, kind of unusual to see. So that was a weird coincidence that I found. And then he has a passion for photographing airplanes, and I work in the aircraft industry. So very cool, very interesting. We've been taking it very slowly. Again, he's a very reserved man. And eventually, late last year, I asked him, well, would you mind if I reached out to Will, my half-brother? And previously, I had already sent a message through Ancestry messaging service and never got a response. And I assumed that was just because, people don't check their accounts that often. So my birth father said, yeah, sure, let me talk to Will and reach out to him. And about a half day later, Will reached out to me through Facebook Messenger. And we've been communicating through Facebook Messenger again a lot, going back and forth. And then about 3 weeks ago, we said, well, why don't we call each other? Why don't we go FaceTime? And since everybody is doing video calling now, gotten used to that. So we've had great two great conversations through FaceTiming, getting to know him, getting to know my family, comparing notes. Great insight on my birth father. Explains a lot. He's actually got a better relationship with his aunts and uncles on that side than he does with his father, our father. It's weird. It's hard. It's hard making that adjustment, trying to call each other brother. I grew up with a sister. I never had a brother. He never had a brother. It's just weird trying to get that language right. But it's great to be able to figure it out with someone else. So through this time of reflection and during this entire crisis, I've been, oh, sorry, I just realized, yes, I have my birth mother's name. I have reached out through snail mail. I've sent several letters, notes. I tried calling a few times, and then late last year, I was a little bit devious. I used my my Google Voice telephone number because I figured that they might be seeing that it was calling from Ohio. So my Google Voice number is centered in Atlanta, Georgia. She lives in Georgia, so I made a phone call through that number. Someone actually answered. Unfortunately, it was her husband, and he asked. I asked if I could speak with my mother, and he asked who I was, and I was bold enough to say, well, I'm Oliver Leembruggen, and I would like to speak to Regina. And he said, oh, I know who you are, and I ask that you not call again. So I don't know for certain if any of my communication has come through. And through all my detective work, I have a picture that I've painted culturally, faith-based practices. The fact that I was born in May, and the man that she's currently married to now for the past 50 years she married him in October of 1969. So, it's a possibility that he had no idea that I existed. My sisters, my half sisters, I don't think they realized I existed. So, it's a time of reflection, and I think I'm coming to the point in which I may, going back and forth with all these other groups. I discussed back and forth on whether I should reach out to my siblings or not, and how to approach it. I've talked with Tracy at length about writing one more letter to my birth mother, hoping that it specifically gets to her, asking, I don't know if any of this communication has got to you. I'd appreciate a response. If I don't get a response, then I may reach out to my half siblings. But again, this is a great time of reflection with this disease that's going around. My adoptive parents are well into their 80s. My mother has dementia, and it's hard to see her that way. And it's hard to see Dad struggling with that. They're stubborn. They're stubborn people that want to live in their house, continue to live in their house, and not be going to a home or anything like that. So I worry. And the fragility of it all of my adoptive parents, not knowing what's going on with my birth mother, have really made the urgency of trying to know who that side of the family has brought that to light. So that's my story so far. We'll see. I've been working on a letter. Like I said, Tracy and I have talked about a letter, and I've been working on a letter mostly in my head. I've started it several times and backspace several times, so we're getting there. But this has been a good time for reflection and for figuring out what's the best way. I don't want to rush into anything. I don't want to harm any relationships, but it's also a fact that I had no choice in this, and I exist. So anyway, thanks for listening. It's therapeutic just talking about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. We really appreciate you sharing your reunion experience with us. All of us are here for you, and anyone that wants to leave your contact information for Oliver, please do so in the chat bar. Thanks again, Oliver. Back to you, Becky.
Okay. That was, that has a lot of impact. Your story has a lot of impact, Oliver. It really does. And you're the depth of, I guess it's the engineering analytical part of you, and some of the level of analyzing you've done yourself really is, it moves me every time I hear you talk about some of your feelings towards this, and especially how you talked about how this period of time makes you have concerns about, not only your adoptive family, but your birth mother, because you don't, and how scary that is to not know what's going on with her, and really know what her health situation is and that type of thing. And is it kind of that running out of time thing, like you may not have that opportunity? Is that part of what is difficult? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's just it's the uncertainty of it all, and I've been trying to say my piece. I don't know if she's heard it, and I'd love to hear her side. And these groups have helped me to understand the culture of give your child up for an adoption and just don't think about it anymore. And that just weighs on me, how much of weight I'm trying to possibly put back on someone else. But
well, thank you for
you're welcome.
For sharing all of that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the last big bucket. Hopefully that's given you, and we'll have more time to discuss some of the things that Oliver brought up here when we get to the discussion mode. And but the last bucket that we talked about is ongoing reunion, and so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about now, and I'll put that in the context of the experience that I've had with reunion, which quite frankly, for 30 years, I didn't think I was ever going to have an adoption reunion. So I think that that's been something that's been even more precious to me. As Marcy mentioned when she introduced me, I had access to my original birth certificate in 1984. I found my birth mother within a couple of years after that, and got a really sound rejection after that. As a matter of fact, what I remember hearing is I had a friend make the call, and I was listening on the extension, and what I remember hearing is, what is she trying to do, ruin my life? Only not quite that calm. and so all of this stuff, all of these feelings, just kind of, I stuffed them for a long time because I was clearly in the fog. It took a long time actually until some of the internet groups started coming out before I really faced everything that I had experienced, all of my experiences with how I felt about adoption. And I'm going to fast forward through all of that to in 2011, I finally had a phone conversation with my birth mother. I reached out to her, I talked with her, and a little bit from what Oliver said earlier, kind of made me think about that fact, birth mothers are told to forget. I don't think they do. I mean, that was the one thing I remember the most from that conversation I had with my mother was her telling me that she loved me and she prayed for me every single day. She remembered what she named me. There's no forgetting when you have a baby. So, that happened in 2011. So even though she didn't forget she had a baby and she loved me, she wasn't willing to tell her husband about me. And he also was not, she also wasn't willing to tell me who my father was. I had a few basic facts and she gave me a few more facts when we were talking. And after a little bit of time, and I realized that we probably weren't going to have, a real close relationship, I just started looking myself. And I figured it out without DNA, without a name. I had enough pieces of the puzzle. Unfortunately, what was in my non-identifying information and what was in my what my mother had told me was all factual. It wasn't, a big bunch of fiction like some people have found. So I was able to figure out who my father was, and I was able to confirm that. And actually, I'm just going to tell you, it's just, I think it's so amazing the way I found this out, because I found a wedding announcement in the newspaper archive that was for my mother's cousin, and she was a bridesmaid in that wedding. That timing fit when my parents would have met. And so I'm thinking, wedding, somebody hooking up, it all makes sense. And I just, I had that feeling, that kind of adoptee sixth sense that my father was related to that. And it ended up, he was the best man in the wedding. And I had done the research and had figured that out, but then I confirmed it with the bride, who was my mother's cousin. And it just so happened that she still knew my father. They went to church together. They'd been friends, still lived in the same small farming community in Illinois. So I had the opportunity to kind of learn a little bit about him. But anyhow, to make a long story short with that, in 2013, I ended up doing what Tracy would tell everybody not to do, what anybody who talks to people about reunions would tell you not to do. And I walked up and introduced myself to him in person. A lot of reasons for that, and a lot of reasons I thought it would work. And really the point I'm getting to with that is that ended up being probably one of the most impactful relationships I've ever had in my life. And we had 3 years and 11 days elapsed from the time that we first met to the time that he passed away. And I think where that fits in now, and what I think about when I think about putting everything on hold from a reunion perspective, is if I had just said, maybe the time's not right for me, I don't know how he's going to feel about this, I don't know that I would have, we had a very short time together anyhow. And I think about that often. If I had waited longer to reach out to him, there would have been even less time. And if I had waited too much longer, I may not have ever had that opportunity to meet him. His health went downhill for about a year. So probably any time in that, I would have had about that 2-year window from the time I discovered him until his health started going downhill. And I am just absolutely so grateful that I had the support from friends in the adoptee community and from my husband, and was able to have that relationship with him for that period of time. So, you know, I know that's only one consideration, but I absolutely would not change that for the world. And I wonder, you know, clearly it wouldn't be the same now, but we'd have to be doing something virtually, and that would have been much harder with him because he was very much a phone and in-person kind of a communicator. This virtual stuff, he wouldn't have done it. He would have never even considered it. So I don't know how that would have worked if we were trying to do this reunion now, but when I think about it from my perspective, I always think about that small window of time that we had and what would have happened if I had not had the courage to reach out to him during that time. Along with finding him, I also found actually his wife, my stepmother, is absolutely wonderful, and I'm still in contact with her fairly frequently. My aunt, some cousins, and 4 siblings, 3 of whom acknowledge me, and I'm in contact with on a fairly regular basis. And actually, they're about 4 hours away, and I'm not super close to any of them. Probably most to my stepmother and my aunt. With my siblings, it's kind of like this formal-ish. We stay in touch on birthdays and you know, how are you doing at the holidays kind of thing. But it's not like, you know, you pick up the phone and call them and have a conversation about how your day went or anything like that. And so really, my relationship with them has not changed. My sister-in-law is a nurse and we're in the type of situation where she would be working with COVID patients. And part of me, I've reached out with Facebook Messenger and just said, hey, thinking about you and that type of thing. But, you know, part of me is a little bit hesitant too, because I imagine their family's in a little bit of an uproar. But I don't really know that. But so anyhow, what I've done is with my stepmother, I'll talk with her about what, you know, hope everybody's okay. Give them my, you know, my regards and let them know that I'm thinking about them and that type of thing. So, which really is nothing out of the ordinary. So really, I guess that's the main point I wanted to make, is that whole bit of time, and that goes back to that made so much of an impression on me that, you know, our lives, we're not getting extra time added on to the end. Then I guess I'm going to fast forward to reunion with my birth mother's family, that even after my father and I met, I still didn't think anything would happen with my birth mother, because I had chosen, and it was, you know, clearly my choice. I knew that I had the right, and my siblings, my 3 siblings, my mother's kept children, had the right to know about me. But for a variety of reasons, I just made that choice that I was going to respect her wishes and not reach out to them independently while she was still living. She really thought that her husband would leave her. I think she truly believed that. So what happened, and Tracy, I'm sure remembers this day well, I opened up Ancestry one day, and I get this, and I've known who my siblings were for, you know, many, many years. And I see this match that is my half sister, and I go, okay, now what do I do with this? And so Tracy and I talked quite a bit that day, and like crafted this perfect response. But by the time I had sent that response and gotten home from work, I had this this Facebook Messenger message from my sister. She'd figured it out. She'd searched, and I'd done enough, you know, publicly in the adoption world that she could tell pretty quickly I was adopted. And from some of the things that she'd seen that I had written and that were online, she was able to put 2 and 2 together. And she had already gone home and basically wrangled the truth out of our mother. So that was in 2018. So that's just been a little over 2 years ago, March of 2018. And those relationships with my siblings are, with my 3 siblings, are probably the closest relationships that I've got. It's just been an amazing experience. And similar to my birth father's side of the family, a lot really hasn't changed for me with my communications with my siblings. The one thing that has changed is, for many years, my brother and one of my sisters have had a place at a camper about 3 hours from here at a private campground. And my husband and I actually ended up buying a place over there after we'd gotten to know each other and knew that we were hitting it off pretty good. And so we, for the last year and a half, have spent just about every weekend together during camping season. And this is getting into camping season and the campground's closed. So what we're doing is, I'm between my brother and sisters and we are probably in contact, mostly via text, about every day. I'm not as in contact with my mother as much, but my mother lives with one of my sisters. So, there's a lot of checking in about, is she staying home? Is she making sure that she's taking care of herself? There's not a lot of people over at the house, some of those kinds of things, because I am worried. I worry about her. She's had some health issues. And, I've got this sense of, I've only known her for 2 years. I've longed for this connection with her for so many years. And I don't, I'm not ready for that to, I don't want some stupid virus to take that away from us, having that relationship. So one of the things that my sister and I have been doing a lot is each day we kind of go back and forth with some, like some of the funniest memes on the whole quarantine COVID stuff that we found for the day. And, we've found that that's a pretty, I enjoy it. I enjoy doing that back and forth with her. We've had, with my brother and I, we have conversations about, he's laid off right now, about some of the, the stuff going around with that. But I'm also trying to make sure that we have connection and talk about subjects that aren't related to this at all too, because I want to make sure that, our relationships and our communications right now aren't just stuck in the circle around, what's going on in the world right now. And, that's a big deal for everybody, but, I don't want that to be all it is. So I keep finding myself trying to make sure that I kind of move the needle forward a little bit and try to, still have some of those other conversations about, what was your experience when you were in high school? Would you, some of those, that whole lifetime of things that you would automatically know about each other that you are trying to play catch up on when you don't meet your siblings until you're all in your middle ages. So, at the same time, if I felt that one of my siblings were having a real tough time with that, I would hope that I would have the, the clarity of thought to go back and say, do you need to take a little break from talking right now? Is this a tough time for you? Is, those types of things. I would hope I would have that, kind of vision to be able to see that's something that they might need, or at least have that conversation with them. So that is pretty much in a nutshell my experience with adoption reunion, which is really kind of a whole lot of, it's kind of going on pretty much the same as it was before, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Thank you, Becky, for sharing that. Do we want to go ahead and open it up to questions at this point? Or Lynn, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, Lynn, are you ready?
Yeah, go ahead and ask me what is it you specifically want me to talk about?
Okay, so, we chatted a little bit earlier, that you, right in the middle of all of this pandemic fun going on, you got the key that you needed to figure out who your birth father was.
Yes.
And kind of where you're at with that and what you're doing with it and why.
Okay. All right. Day one of the Ohio pandemic, I was trying some tricks. I do this all the time, so it was like same day, same thing, different day. I was just trying to do some surname searches with a second cousin match I got in January, and a kind of a unique surname. And I just changed the spelling by one letter through Ancestry's yearbooks, because I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but Ancestry keeps adding more and more yearbooks and more photos. And so I kept thinking that was the key for me. And so I ran a search through Ancestry and I hit pay dirt and finally found a guy who I thought, this is him. However, because there is no formula, right, Oliver? My case is the not normal formula for DNA because my father was Peruvian. He was a recent immigrant, and Peruvian records have a lot of holes in them. So even though I found this candidate, I couldn't prove it. I couldn't find a birth record for him. I couldn't find a birth record for his son, who would be my brother. I couldn't find a marriage record for him. So I was at a loss. I could not find a way to connect him to my second cousin match. So that took a couple more weeks of randomly messaging people on Facebook. That was my strategy. I felt like I didn't have a choice. And so I got really lucky, and a cousin of my father responded to me from Peru. She was fortunately bilingual. And she didn't know my father, but she knew how he was related to their family. And so she kept asking her mother, and she kept responding to my questions. And so I finally was able to place him in the tree. And so that was pretty exciting, because I met my birth mother 14 years ago, and she wouldn't tell me his name. So I've literally been looking for 14 years.
Wow.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I did email my brother, and I haven't heard back. It's been a few weeks. So I just kind of let that drop. And then my birth father apparently abandoned his Facebook page because you can just tell he hasn't updated a photo in years. And so the rumor is he's living in Honduras. I have ways that I could probably get in touch with him, but like I told Becky, I'm kind of just at a standstill right now. I don't really feel any urgency to get in touch with the family any more than I needed to connect him to my tree. My goal was to find out who he was. I really don't feel any urgency to meet anyone at this point. So I think that's what Becky wanted me to share. Is that right, Becky?
Yeah, kind of. And do you think it's just because of all of this stuff going on, or would you think you would feel differently about that if life was going on normal?
No, I don't think it's about the quarantine at all.
Okay.
For me, I think it's, first of all, I just always assumed he was dead. You know how you have ideas in your head about how it's going to be. And I just always thought he was dead. So when I found out he was alive, that was a huge shock. He would be 83. So that was a big shock. And I think I've been doing a lot of grieving. So I've been journaling. I've been starting on my memoir. I've been doing a lot of walking and listening to music and just trying to process what I now know were a boatload of lies that my birth mother told me. And so it's mainly me wading through a bunch of grief. And I just don't think while you're wading through a bunch of grief is a great time to make contact with people. That's just for me. That's my thoughts on it.
Probably pretty darn wise, huh? You'll know when it's time, right?
Yeah, or if it isn't, it isn't. You know, I don't know if it ever will be. Well, I guess it remains to be seen. I feel a huge sense of relief, and more so than I feel any kind of need to reach out at this point. And I kind of didn't really expect that. You know, you and I did that support group for years. We know each other's story like the back of our hand, but you just never know how you're really going to feel until it happens. So that's where I'm at.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And then I guess the last thing I'll say, I think the slide that's up there now is just a few resources that we thought we would put together. Lynn talked about basically both of those two self-care things. And I know Lynn and I have talked about, you know, basically taking care of yourself, pandemic, adoption, everything, you know, you need to do that. Those are the two things: the gratitude practice, where I write down 3 things I'm grateful for each day, and getting outside and walking every day have been the things that I've done that kind of keep me sane in all of this. And then we've also shared a couple of articles that I think are kind of helpful as far as just kind of things to think about, you know, in this period of time. One of them's on grief and one of them's on resilience. And then I think probably everybody in here is familiar with the Adoptees On podcast, but when it comes to reunion and all of the different scenarios that can happen with reunion, I think that those podcast episodes are probably one of the absolute best places to get to learn about other people's experiences, and you know, we're learning from the experts, and that's all of us, right? So with that, you know, let's just open it up, and you know, what would you guys like to talk about when it comes to reunion?
Got questions out there?